Hello and welcome to another episode of our Brothers Creed podcast, where we inspire fathers to help build the blueprint for the next generation. And we are the Thomas Brothers. I'm Jared.
And I'm Ethan. And today we are going to be talking about the impact of one, the the impact that the contribution of one individual can have on society, on maybe the world, on their town or their family. Right? We are going to talk through several different people and their impacts on the world, right? There's been many people that have been uh maybe how they acted or their example or their contribution, invention, whatever it might be, has had a massive effect on future generations. And so Jared and I both have kind of some examples of those people and maybe some of those turning points in history where we're like, man, if this person wouldn't have done this, we'd be potentially living a whole different life today. So, really kind
Right.
of a cool thing to think about, whether we're thinking about these individuals or we're thinking about our life. What's the impact that I'm going to leave behind? So, going to be a great episode with a lot of cool stories, I'm sure.
All right, let's dive in.
Do not go gentle into that good night. Old age should burn and rave at close of day.
You should be a monster, an absolute monster, and then you should learn how to control it.
No retreat, no surrender.
You can't conceive of what I'm capable of.
There is no tomorrow. There is no tomorrow.
What we do in life, that goes in eternity.
Okay, so the power of one was kind of an interesting topic that I was thinking about, and I think it's there's almost like this butterfly effect. You've probably heard of that, of like sometimes something small that can happen that could maybe ripple effect throughout time or other people or around our world. So I like this in the context of somebody taking action to do something. So I found an interesting kind of a quote about this. It says, "The power of one refers to the idea that even a single individual can create significant positive change, implying that one person's actions, no matter how small, can have a ripple effect and impact a larger community or situation. Essentially, the belief that anyone can make a difference through their individual efforts." Obviously, you can make a positive difference in the world or you can make a negative difference. And so, when I think about the different ways that we can make differences, these are some of the ones that came to mind. Ethan would love to hear if you have any to add here. One is simply your ideas can have an impact on the world. Just things that you put out there. Obviously, people are never going to know what your ideas are if you never put them out there. Your actions, probably the biggest way that will impact the world. Your words, which can sometimes be tied with actions. Your inaction, not doing something, is also a way to impact the world around you, whether that's choosing not to stand up for your rights, or choosing not to intervene when maybe you should have, or choosing to stay silent when you should be loud. Those are kind of all like things that maybe you, like sins of omission, if you will, but there's also ways that you can not take action that likely will end up, things can end up good. And when we say things, when we have ideas, when we act, it creates this ripple effect that can go to those that are around us, and eventually you get this accumulation of activities to where, so if you influence somebody that's next to you and they say, okay, well, I like that idea, or I like what you've done there, I will do the same. Like there's a movie, Oh, remind me what that movie was called. I think it was called Pass It On or Pass It Along or something like that. Where this
Pay it forward.
Pay It Forward, that was it. Where this person did like 3 life-changing deeds, right? And then that person did 3 life-changing deeds to someone else, and then somebody else, and then say, hey, just pay it forward. So it's kind of a cool concept that we can enact in our everyday life, even just with like a smile or a, hey, how's it going? Like a kind word. Those are all ways that we can act and say things in accordance with the positive changes we want to see in the world. Anything you'd add to that list, Ethan, or like categories of ways to impact the world?
Yeah, well, kind of one of the directions I went a little bit with some of my examples was technology, which I think maybe could be kind of a mixture of ideas and action, maybe. Um, but that's one that I thought was interesting, some pivotal points along our history that's like, oh yeah, like that piece of technology that person, you know, improved on or invented or whatever else really had a massive impact on the future.
Mm-hmm. 2 examples I'll share now is that, where these are big, widespread impacts that someone has made. You may have heard of this guy named Jonas Salk, and he created the vaccine for polio, which prevented countless deaths and causes of paralysis among lots of children. So that was a huge, impactful thing that he invented that, and then it had a global impact. Another guy was Edward Jenner. He discovered that people infected with a mild, non-life-threatening disease called cowpox made you immune to smallpox. So that observation saved the lives of tens of millions of people because they were able to inoculate people from smallpox. Smallpox was an absolute killer of a disease, and so those are 2 examples of individuals that had very wide-reaching, very wide impacts throughout the world, which I don't think that's very common. In fact, I know it's not very common, but those are kind of the stark examples that people probably would first go to when they think about this kind of thing.
Yeah, for sure. And I kind of broke it down into a couple different categories. So one category is um kind of names that people know. So like who are the most well-known people in the world? But just because you're the most well-known person doesn't mean that you had the most impact, right? Maybe your platform was bigger to have an impact, but we're no. It's like those 2 names that you came up with. Like I didn't know exactly. If you were to ask me before we started talking, what did these 2 guys do? I probably been like, I'm not exactly sure, right? But they had a massive impact, and so kind of that first category is kind of the most well-known names. A lot of these are, William Shakespeare, Julius Caesar, Beethoven, Michael Jackson, Albert Einstein, right? These are like all names that most anyone around the world, I guess, in a civilized country environment would be like, oh yeah, I know who, Shakespeare is, or, Michael Jackson at that, or Taylor Swift. But then the second group is like people that had a massive impact, right? These might not be people that you specifically know, or you could just name off the top of your head, though, this is who they are and this is what they did. And then kind of the third group was kind of a both group that I had put together. And some of these are people that are extremely well known and had a massive impact on life.
Yeah.
There's far fewer of them. But I'll kind of go through a couple of the examples that I had that people that had some of the largest impact, kind of that power of one. And I broke this up into, like I had said earlier, some different technologies. So I tried to look at like history and see like what are some different things that really kind of set off um, the uh, the next wave and the next generation. And so a couple of the different things was electricity was one of the things. The telegraph or communication. So being able to communicate, and I'll go into each one of these. Being able to communicate over long distances, and then the last one was light, being able to kind of make the world a smaller place through air travel, which is much quicker. So electricity, this really changed how the human race just operated in general. We're no longer hindered by the nighttime and darkness, where you had candles and whale oil fire, lamps that you
Yeah.
had to try to work by or whatever else. People It lengthened the time that people could work and they could socialize, and people didn't have to go to sleep as early or whatever else. So it just changed the entire environment of the world and how people lived. And so, Thomas Edison and really kind of the development around the electric light bulb, um, and kind of improving upon that and really kind of perfecting to a certain extent that light bulb. Uh, Tesla was Nikola Tesla. He pioneered the kind of a different type of electrical current, which was AC current versus Thomas Edison's DC power, which made power transmission over a long distance a lot easier. So that power could be brought across the town, across the city, across the state. Um, those two things, or those two people, were had a massive impact on just the way people lived in their time. Communication, very very important as well, allowing people to communicate quickly over long distances. Um, people could share ideas better, they could communicate better, faster, they could share information. And the telegraph, the electric telegraph, was invented by Samuel Morse, among some other people as well, in 1837. We've probably done some episodes
We
on
talked
some of
about
these
Morse,
too.
yeah.
Yeah. The telephone in 1876 was invented by Alexander Graham Bell, and then the radio by let's see, Guglielmo Marconi. Marconi, yeah, macaroni.
Don't recognize
Developed
that name.
wireless communication,
Hmm.
which laid the foundation for just modern radio broadcasting
Yeah.
in the late 1800s. So communication and information is power, and so being able to share that information um, is massive. And
Yeah.
so those are kind of some names that were like, oh man, what it's kind of interesting, because I looked at, instead of looking at a name that was who did something awesome,
Hmm.
I almost kind of looked at some things that were really awesome that were done. It was like, who did that?
Yeah.
And then kind of looked into those names.
Yeah.
So that one, and then flight, the put the Wright brothers here. There were other people around the world as well. I know in France and in several other places, people that were exploring flight. I think the Wright brothers were the first ones to do it just for a sustained period of time.
Yeah.
But in a matter of uh, 60 years,
Yeah.
they got to the moon,
Yeah.
supposedly.
Allegedly, we were dropping nukes on people.
Yeah.
Well, it was, I think the Wilbur was still alive and we dropped the nuke on Japan. So it's pretty incredible. He saw a B-52. I mean, the B-52s, man, they're still in service today.
Yeah.
Incredible machines. And so, but it's not the power of one isn't just about you doing everything. It's about the ripple effect that your actions have.
Yeah.
And so maybe they proved that it could be done, and then they did prove that it could be done, and then from there, other people took it. It was like they passed the baton on to the next folks, and they just ran with it even more.
Yeah.
To
How
the
do you get, innovation, lighter engines and everything else? I mean, that was all kind of sparked by one person or group of people. And then, yeah, that ripple effect, can be massive. What was that movie? The butterfly effect?
Yeah. So yeah, totally. I have kind of an interesting little not a story, but it's kind of like a factoid in kind of story form, that kind of illustrates this powerful effect through time of someone's actions or of someone's maybe standard or something that they've done. So, do you have any idea how wide railroad rails are between each other?
I thought they were as wide as like the wagon wheels between a wagon.
Yeah, so that's a good point. So they're actually 4 feet and 8.5 inches. So you might wonder, well, why are they that wide? So the railroads were initially built by English folks, English engineers in the United States. And then so you say, okay, well, and that was the gauge that the English used. So you say, okay, well, why did the English use that gauge? Well, because the first rail lines were built by the same people who built wagons, tramways, and that was the gauge that they used. So why did they use that? Well, because people who built the tramways used the same jig tools they used to build the wagons, like I had mentioned, and they wanted to get the same spacing. So why did they use that spacing with the wagon wheels, right? Well, if they tried to use any other spacing on these really old roads, it would break the wheels. So there's lots of old, very old, rutted out roads back from the Roman Empire times throughout Europe. And so and like I said earlier, if you build a wagon wheel that has different ruts, different sizings, then those ruts will break it down. So they matched those old ruts. So the Roman chariots formed the initial ruts, which were set like a Roman chariot went up to England and all over Europe in some places. They had this standard spacing, a standard gauge of spacing. And you might ask, well, why is that? Well, the reason why that is that the Imperial Roman chariots were made just wide enough to accommodate the rear end of 2 horses. So it's
Really?
the spacing of 2 horses, the backside of 2 horses, and then that is the why the spacing has done such. So interestingly enough, one of the space shuttles, and I think this is from, this is not the SpaceX stuff. This is more like when they were doing the NASA program. There was these 2 giant rockets that were built at a company in Utah, and the company had to ship. The company's called thought-provoking. The factories in Utah, and they had to ship these giant tubes of boosters to where the rockets were going to take off in Florida, and it had to go. It had to go by train, and the train went through a mountain, and the walls were very tight. So they had to build these rocket boosters with a circumference that was essentially the same width as those railroad tracks, because it couldn't be any wider than that. So, in effect, the backside of 2 horses, that wheel length, the standard that was set all the way back in Imperial Rome, is to this day affecting the size of the
Space travel.
space boosters that we have, because that has been passed down. So I think it's such a cool anecdotal history about a standard that has been set, and how that has been passed down throughout all these generations, and how that actually affects how we act today. Well, yeah, and if you think about that, maybe there's standards in your home that you set with your kid. That or maybe there's standards that your parents unknowingly set just because that's the way it's always been done. Or there are things that you do in your family, or maybe you set new standards or new traditions in your own family to say, "Hey, this is how we do things." Because I think that, and if you think about those traditions, think about what they mean, think about how they can serve you and your kids, maybe start those and to pass down a wholesome activity or a wholesome trend would be great. Obviously, there's other ways that you can pass it. You can pass down alcoholism. You can pass down abuse. You can pass down all kinds of things. So be careful about what kind of standards you set, right?
Yeah. Have you heard the story of the lady that cut the ends off the ham? So it was
I don't
kind
think
of like
so.
a family tradition thing. So there was this, lady, and she would make a ham every, Easter, whatever, Thanksgiving, whenever people make ham.
Hmm.
And every time she would make this ham, she would cut the ends off of the ham, cut maybe an inch or an inch and a half off of each side of the ham. And so she did this, and then her daughter, whenever her daughter grew up, her daughter always cut, an inch and a half off of each side of the ham whenever she cooked it for her family.
Hmm.
And then the next daughter, when she was grown and she was, cooking the ham for the family, she would go and she would cut the ends off of the ham. And one day the husband or one of the kids of the youngest lady, they said, "Mom, why are you cutting the end off of the ham?" And the lady says, "Well, I that's what I always saw my mom do." And so she asked her mom, and she said, "Well, why do you cut the ends off the ham?" And she said, "Well, that's what grandma always did." And so I always did that. And then they said, "Well, let's go ask grandma why she did that." And they went and asked grandma, and they said, "Well, how come you always cut an inch and a half off of either side of the ham every time you cook a ham?" And she goes, "Oh, I just didn't have a pan that was big enough." Right. And so it
Yeah.
was just like one thing that her ham pan wasn't big enough, so she always had to trim the ham to fit it in the pan. And
Yeah.
it just was like a tradition thing that kind of went from one person to one person to one person to one person. And it was like, why are we even doing this? Um,
It's like, why do I store medicine in the butter portion of my of my refrigerator?
yeah.
Dude,
Or
that's
my
like one of
or
those
my
things.
wife's like, why do you store the syrup in the refrigerator? I'm like, aren't you supposed to store it in the refrigerator? She's like, no. I'm like, are you sure? Well, I don't know. I guess you're not supposed. I guess you're not supposed to store syrup in the refrigerator like
Well, it
maple
depends on
syrup.
what kinds of syrup.
Well, I guess if it
If it's the
says, but
kind that has
I
the,
checked on the bottle specifically, and it doesn't say refrigerate after opening.
is it the kind that has like a little window that says hot when you warm it up in the?
No, I don't think they make those anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah, you warm it up in the microwave, and it says lava.
Yeah. It's hot and it just starts melting. Uh, yeah.
Uh,
There's so many things like that where, but especially when you get married. First when you get married, I put everything in the refrigerator, man.
yeah,
Or it's like, especially when like I was from, the South. My wife is from Denver, Colorado, where it's like super dry, So like, chips or anything like that. I'm like, you got to roll that up real tight or you got to put that in the fridge. And she's like, why do you guys do that? It's like in the South, man, the humidity will just kill those chips and they'll be soggy or they won't be crisp anymore. Where, that's not a problem
yep,
you face up in North, And so it's just kind of interesting from different environments. People do things very differently as well. Like there are different traditions passed down.
yeah. Interesting. So the last one that I had from an impact perspective, and this was kind of maybe a no-brainer for me, but how I said there's like the category of just like really well-known people, and those people aren't always the most impactful, but then you have a category of people that are really impactful, but maybe people don't know exactly remember their names. Then the third category was kind of both. And my main example for this category was uh, Jesus Christ. That was one for me that, I mean, even if you just look across the world, right? As of 2023, approximately 31% of the entire world's population identifies as Christian,
Yeah.
which makes Christianity the largest religion globally. And so, and even if you are not a member of the of a Christian faith, you probably have heard of Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
And so, that to me was from checks the box as everybody has heard of him. And then, depending on your religious belief of this person, um, I guess that kind of determines the impactfulness on life, right? And on um, individual salvation or whatever you want to call it. But that to me was like I was trying to think of like who's the most well-known person in the entire world. And it's just like I mean,
Yeah.
I personally believe, that Jesus Christ is my specific, Lord and Savior. But it's interesting. I remember I had a conversation with one of my really good friends in high school who was a great guy. And we were talking about Christ and we were talking about, and if he was a person or kind of what we believed. And he goes, well, I think that he was like a real person in history, um, that maybe did a lot of great things, but he goes, I don't think that like the religious aspect really had anything to do with it. I think he was just a really good guy.
Yeah.
And that's always kind of stuck with me. I mean, maybe he, yeah, I think he was a really good guy, right? But you have to be a really good guy to have like basically be the most well-known person in the entire population of the world. Um, so I don't know. That one kind of me was I don't want to throw in the Trump card there. And Trump wasn't on my list, but
I think he
that
is.
was
I
one
think.
for me that was interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the kids asked the Alexa one time, they're like, "Who's the most well-known person? Who's the most famous person on earth?" And I think it was Donald Trump. To be funny about that, uh, but I think that part of it is just being controversial. I wouldn't say
Yeah.
that Jesus was, um, popular because he was such a great guy. I think he is very popular, and passed down through the ages because he was very controversial. And a
Yeah,
lot of the things
that's
he
true.
was saying, I mean, heck, they crucified him because of the stuff that he was saying. People
Went
one day,
against the status quo.
yeah, people one day loved him, and the next day they were hating him. Screaming for someone else to be Barabbas to be released instead. So it's yeah, I think you're absolutely right that he's obviously one of I think the most well known person or a figure in history to probably ever live. I can't even think about anybody else who would even come close to trumping that. But yeah, talk about an impact, right? You got millions of people around the globe throughout the centuries. But I would say impact for good, but I would also say impact for bad in the sense that people have used Christ's name to do horrible things. Just look at like the Inquisition, right? Where they were, I mean, look at all the torture techniques that some of these churches used to use. If someone was gossiping, they would put an iron thing in your mouth, or they would split you in half if they thought you were a witch, or the Salem witch trials, or there's been absolutely horrible things done in his name by people
Yeah.
who were just trying to manipulate people. And so in that sense, like, I mean, because it's just a powerful name, people respond to that. And then I think there's many people who can use that for good and then also for evil. So it's kind of like
Taking advantage of other people. I think you're absolutely right.
at some point it takes on almost a life of its own, right?
Yeah, it's almost like
it's not about what he did or what he lived. It's just that you grab onto whatever facts of his life that you want to, and then you can project whatever it is you want to project.
yeah, as I'm kind of thinking, it's almost it's more than just a person.
Yeah.
It's an idea. It's a
Yeah.
I almost think of like the internet,
Yeah.
right? The internet is so powerful for so many good reasons, but it can also be so powerful for and used for not good things
Yeah,
too.
exactly. Totally.
Um,
Depending on who's wielding it, right?
yeah,
And
yeah.
what their
Depending on
intentions are.
the impact is there. Yeah, and a lot of times it's the wielder of the tool
So
for
it just
sure.
makes you wonder, like, what percentage of that historic figure is accurate, or what, as it goes down through time and people interpret things, people misinterpret things. What percentage of that that we're hearing is maybe the last 5 guys interpreted it the right way, but the last before them, the past 20 guys misinterpreted it or changed it slightly to make it advantageous to them, So it's like, that's the tricky part, is is trying to decide, especially when like an oral history, or not just an oral history, but like a history that's been passed down for thousands and thousands of years.
Yeah. Yeah, I think sometimes it's hard to get consistency in thought. There are things that do exist, like scripture and things like that,
Yeah.
but those aren't completely untouched by philosophies and ideas that could potentially, or translations that could have changes.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of that's personal too. But I think the power of one. I think there's lots of people that have had awesome contributions to just the world in
Yeah.
general.
Yeah.
And I think like we talked about, it's like a domino effect. And I think a lot of times we don't realize the effect of our actions sometimes, right? We
Mhm.
have no idea who our kids are going to grow up to be, or if they're gonna um grow up to what is the story? There was a British soldier that spared Hitler's life in World War One as a young German soldier, and you know look look what impact came out of that. Right. And maybe that person's father taught him to be compassionate or something else, or maybe he had an experience that made him in that specific moment make that decision. And so there's so much that will happen that how can we, what do they say, a journey of 1,000 miles starts with one step, so
Yep.
watch your
Exactly
step.
right. Yeah, exactly.
So
Absolutely right. And it just starts with one thing. And so I think that sometimes even I mentioned earlier people's words. I like having conversations with people, and obviously not because I have a podcast, right? But talking with people about their different beliefs. And I've worked at several different places where I found someone who has the opposite political leanings as I do, and we always have discussions. Earlier in my career, those discussions were a little bit louder in the office than they should have been. Later, or more recently in my career, those conversations were very quiet at the office. But what's funny is that a lot of those people who I've met have become good friends of mine. And we still keep in touch this day, even though they live across the country or we don't work together anymore. I still text them every now and then, hey, man, how's the family doing? How's stuff going? We make jokes back and forth all the time. But it's so important to have those conversations. Sometimes I will remember what that person said, and I'll be like, you know what? That was very interesting what they said. And I'll remember my response at that time in my life. And sometimes I'll be like, wow, I feel like now maybe I wasn't right when I said that, or maybe I was wrong when I said that. Or maybe, oh yeah, I was dead on when I said that, and time has proven me that to be true. Or the opposite. So it's just interesting as you have those conversations and people say things, you say things to people. So sometimes I don't know if other people do this, but sometimes I think back and reflect on things that I've said, things that people have said previously, and it's probably an anxiety thing, but I just like sit in my bed thinking about something stupid I said like back in high school to someone, like
You're like, dang it, why'd I say that? And
beating
you're
myself
like,
up
it
over
really
again.
does not matter anymore.
Yeah, so that was freaking 30 years ago, man, or 20 years ago. But yeah, it's words have impacts too, and sometimes even something said a long time ago can, I think, influence somebody even today or in their life. So
Yeah.
So don't
Completely.
verbally abuse your kids. Be patient with your kids. Be soft with them, and be patient with your wife as well. And I would say, like, choose your words carefully. What do they say? Words spoken in anger are like can never be recalled. Like, it's better to, if you're angry or really upset, it's better to say nothing sometimes than to say something that you don't mean out of anger. So,
Yeah.
especially with the tender hearts of your children, I wouldn't want my kids ever to think that I don't love them extremely or I don't care about them, even if I'm yelling at them for stop hitting their brother for the 20,000th time. There's a lot of that going on in my house. A lot of hitting.
Yeah.
A lot of wrestling. Wrestling's okay, but when it gets to just be punching each other in the back, I'm like, that's not wrestling, guys. Like running up to your brother.
That's losing control.
Running up to your brother, just punching him as hard as you can in the back, and then running off. Like that's not fighting with honor.
That's cowardice.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. All right. Well, this has been great. I think we've talked through a lot of great people that have made awesome contributions to the world. There are so many more that we didn't get to cover. Whether it's contributions to science or
social
to
standings like Martin Luther King or
so
women's
so many
rights
things.
or all these or so many things.
Yeah, politics and yeah. So what my suggestion would be, and what I'm going to try to do is like we talked about, maybe take an inventory or have in the back of your mind, right, whenever you do things or make decisions, that like, what is the potential impact of this action going to be? I think sometimes maybe it'll be easy to determine. Sometimes it won't be. But if we have that in the back of our minds, that there is power in the one, there is power in making individual decisions, and really kind of learning from all of these examples of great people in history that have done so many amazing things. Let's learn from them. That's one of the pillars of our podcast, really, is to kind of just explore all of these interesting things that so many amazing people have done and apply some of those awesome strategies or credos into our own personal lives. So have a this episode is coming out around Thanksgiving, so have a wonderful Thanksgiving. Enjoy the love and of those around you, and as always, let's build our creed together.
Excellent. Let's do it.